do that again at some other point. In the meantime, we have, it's Hani and myself are going to do a presentation. I'm going to start off. I'm going to try not to go more than 40 minutes or so, I think, though we'll see what happens here. Hani's presentation is about 50 minutes too, so that should give us plenty of time for a break in between the two sessions as well. So I'm going to talk about Sequelize. So I picked this horrible, cheesy thing here, by the way, because Eric is like a DJ, so I thought he would find that very funny. But now that he's not here, the joke is kind of lost. Sequelize. So let's kind of do like Mean Girls, and everybody close their eyes. Raise your hand if you've ever had to use a SQL database. It's like everybody, right? Okay. Most JavaScript stuff that's out there right now, though, is pretty much optimized for use with NoSQL. Mongoose, fantastic. There's other things as well. There's actually very little that's out there that's pretty robust and has been around for a while that lets you do something like Hibernate, an object relation manager kind of software package with JavaScript. About 6 months ago, I started. Normally, I work for Flexion, by the way, who's buying the pizza tonight. And for the past couple of years, I've been working on a large backbone JavaScript project with a Grails backend. And you don't have to get me on there, I promise you. But about almost a year ago now, I guess, I started working on a side project for my wife and her business using Angular with Node. And we're building it's a legal application. And eventually I started off designing it for a NoSQL backend. And eventually we decided that we just weren't seeing that there was a document there at all that we could actually store in the NoSQL database and reliably retrieve. And my wife is like, thinking up all these queries and, various ways that she wants to get the data and stuff. So it became pretty evident that we needed a SQL database. So at that point, Alan, who is one of the people I work with, and myself started looking at alternatives that we could use to Mongoose, which is what we were using before in Node. And we came up with Sequelize, which has been around for a while. I want to say about 3 years, maybe it's just 2 years, but it's got a lot of documentation. There are some other things out there too. I guess I should actually use my slides here, huh? So Sequelize, what is it? It's a JavaScript ORM for SQL databases like Postgres, MariaDB, and MySQL. And one of the reasons that we decided to go with SQL too was that Postgres became available on Amazon. So once that happened, it was kind of much a no-brainer just to do that. There are some alternatives out there, Bookshelf.js, and there's something called Node ORM. Alan looked at Bookshelf a little bit. It didn't really do what we needed it to do. Maybe it does now. I mean, all of these things are in such quick life cycle development cycles that, who knows, by the time you've finished evaluating something and used it for a year, it's probably obsolete. But it's doing what we want it to do for now anyway. So, it's very easy to install. It's all node-based, NPM. There's good documentation on the web for the most part. What you can't find on the web, you can usually find in Stack Overflow. They have two things that are up there that will help you get started. One is just a generic getting started page that's right on the Sequelize homepage, and then there's a getting started with Express. So my application is using Express as our router, and that was basically the instructions that I followed to get this going initially. And I'm going to kind of talk about what that does a little bit here in a second. So most of the documentation that you'll see out there will actually start off talking about how to install it, how to use require to get it in. When you run the little Express installation thing, it's going to create a it's going to want, you'll have to make a models directory, and inside of that models directory, it's going to generate a file called index.js or index.coffee if you're using Coffee, which I'm going to be using tonight. While the models are a good place to start, sometimes I think the migrations get overlooked. And the migrations are really important because it's what is going to allow you to work on a team of other developers and to make changes to your database in an incremental fashion, to your mappings in an incremental fashion as you move forward. So the migrations are basically the thing that gives you the ability to define a script which is going to create your tables for you. And then as you go on and you're modifying those tables, you define additional scripts that then apply those modifications to the initial creation of the table. And I'll show you a little bit about how that works. If you're working by yourself or with a couple of people, or even for a long time, we were in sort of a development mode where we didn't really care about the database structure all that much. We could blow it away at any instant and start over again. So we weren't really using the migrations, except to just do the creations of the tables automatically. But once you're in a situation where you've got data in your database you don't want to blow away, or you've got table structures that you want to be able to add to incrementally as you go on, you're going to need to use the migrations. So I would suggest starting off with those, and everything will be good. All right. So let me show you some stuff here. So when you run the Express startup stuff that's out there, what is going on with my Chrome? Oh, I see. Here we go. So it's sequelizejs.com. This is the getting started. They have what I was talking about, use with Express. If you go through all this stuff, you're going to use npm to install it. You're going to make a directory called models, and then it gives you a little example of how to create a little app. So basically, inside of let me make this one full screen too here. So inside of your models directory, you're going to have an index file. Is that big enough for everybody to see okay? It's kind of small on my monitor. So big things to notice here are you're requiring Sequelize. You're also requiring this config. This isn't entirely necessary, but it's kind of the best practice, I guess, that I've seen a lot. Just make a directory called config, put a file in it. That file is going to have different environments set up. Oh, it's actually not that one. It's this one. And basically it's going to say if you're in development, it's going to have these different keys set up, and then you can just refer to those keys from all of your scripts. So we're using a username of Postgres, no password. My database is called MadJS. It's running on my local host at port 5432, and I'm using the Postgres dialect. So if we go back to here, we'll see that we're going to new up a Sequelize object. We're passing in the database, which is MadJS, the username, which is Postgres, no password, which is that. The examples they give you have this, the dialect. I think their examples are for MySQL, actually, but this you just change it to Postgres for Postgres. The host, which is going to be localhost, and the port, which is 5432. Now, I've got a couple of things here that you won't see in their example. One, to get logging going to your console, you just say logging console.log. And that's really nice when you're doing development because all of the SQL that's being generated by Sequelize will flow through your console. So anytime you have a question about what the app is doing, you look in your browser, you see it did a post to something. You can go look in your console and you'll see that it did, select, insert, update, whatever. All the SQL is right there, which is really nice. This omit null is also kind of nice because it means that if you pass null values, it won't store them as null in the database. It's just going to store them as empty or not store them at all. This read dir sync stuff here is sort of the magic. What this is doing is it's going to go through the directory which we're in, which is models right now, and all of the files except index.js and index.coffee, it's going to basically import those and then create a model for them and attach them to the DB object. And then this keys thing here is going to go through that and call the associate method on each of those models, if it has a property called associate. Now what that does is your models are going to have keys in them. I'm not sure what you call them actually, commands or something, that if you run associate, it will read those out of the model classes and do your association. So it's a relational database, right? So you have this idea of a thing can belong to something else. So you'll have a belongs to clause, and then something can have many. So you'll see has many as well. But that's the core of getting Sequelize set up and running inside of your models directory. So earlier I was talking about the migrations. Let's just start. Now I've got Postgres installed here. Database called MadJS, and it's just the Postgres user. So I've got my database. So obviously you're going to need a relational database of some kind installed, and you're going to need to know how to get into it. You're going to have to configure that in this file here. Once you're configured, though, you can get going by actually creating a table in the database if you want to. And earlier, I mean, you could just go to the database and create the table, right? But it's better practice, I think, to start with a migration. So just go ahead and create the migration file, and things will be good. So let's do this one. Oh, let me show you how to do that. So they give you a couple of utilities that you can use to do this stuff. You got to run Sequelize out of your node modules.bin. If you pass it -c and then the name of the migration, it'll create the migration for you. So let me just do the help here. Oops. Yep. So you can see -c is create a migration. You give it the name of a migration. So if I wanted to create a migration like you know, and I'm not sure if there's standards on doing this, but I usually do like create underscore and then the name of the table that I want to create. And usually the table names are actually plurals as well, because they're going to be things that include other objects. So if I want a table that holds things, for example, I'm going to call it things instead of thing. Something like that. And then just do that. That'll create a file for you. It'll store it in a migrations directory. And it'll look, well, let me create one just to show you what it looks like out of the box. So it created things2 here. So this is sort of just the base here. You can see it's got an up function that takes the migration object and your data types and a done, and it's got a down function. So the whole idea of this is that when you run it, if you're just running the migrations, it'll run the upside. If you're doing a migrations undo, it runs the downside. And it keeps a little table in the database that keeps track of which migrations have been run. And one of the things that Sequelize command gave us is, if you look at the name of the file, it's basically just a timestamp of when I ran it, right? So as you're adding these migrations, and if you use that -c thing to create them, I mean, I just do this myself a lot. I'll just modify it and change it. But then it will keep track of what order they were in. So you can do things like go out to the command line, and I'm going to blow this one away. But you can do things like go out to the command line then and run -- migration, and or is it migrations? I can't remember. Yep. Well, is it migrate? Yes. And then it will see that, in this case, it says there's no pending migrations. And the reason for that is that there probably aren't any. Yeah. So I'm going to move this one in here. This is going to create a things table for us. And I can run that. So let me talk a little bit about this, the structure of this first here. So you can see that in the upside of things, we're going to create migration.create table. It's going to be called things. There's three things here that, no pun intended, that you really have to have. If you want auto increment IDs on your fields in the table, you got to have something like that. And it's basically that for all of the databases that I've seen so far. The other two things that it will automatically provide for you when you update your models and you create models is the created at and the updated at fields. There are ways that you can change those and have them be different or whatever if you want to, but that's just sort of out of the box what they're expecting those fields to be. So this table, things, basically I've defined three additional fields here. Number, which is an integer, and all of these types are defined off of this data types object. It's not going to allow nulls, and it has to be unique. And then hair color, outfit color, those are just strings. You can probably find examples in their documentation of how to do just about every kind of data type. There's lots of things here that you can use. There's a default value that you can assign. All sorts of stuff, validations as well. I'm going to show a couple of those later. So just to create this table right here, to get this created, I'm going to go out and run migrate. And you can see that it ran the migrations, it ran create things.js, and now if I go and I look in my database, if I'm in the right database, I should see a things table. Yes, I do. And you should see that it's got an ID, a number, a hair color, an outfit color created at, updated at. So then if I decide that, okay, I don't want that, I want to change it, I want to add something to it or whatever, to back it out, you just do a dash undo. It'll basically run the downside of that command, which was migration.dropTable things. So now if we go and look at the database, we'll have to do a refresh. It's gone. Okay. So let's say we want to add something here. How about like sex? I'm just going to copy this. I guess gender is really what I'm talking about, though, isn't it? We'll call it gender. Take that allow null off. Well, let's just leave it in there for clarity. And then I run this again. Look at my database. And I've got the new field there. So you can work like that, sort of before you share it with everybody else. But once you've shared that migration file with other people and they're running it locally on their workstation too, if you want to modify that table from then on, you have to use an additional migration script which will modify the table rather than create the table. And I'm going to show one of those in just a little bit here. All right, now that we have our things table, how are we going to get this out of the database? So the migration script is run, it's created the things table. There's two other pieces that you need. You need a model for it, and you need a controller for it, just because we're using Express. In terms of Sequelize, I guess you only need the model. So Let me pull out the model here. And here's an example of a typical model. So you can actually ignore this at the top for now. So we're passing in Sequelize in the data types. We're naming our object, which is thing. We're defining, or the model rather, we're defining 2 fields on it, or 3 fields on it, number, hair color, and outfit color. And I added what I had, gender, type. And that's probably fine. Oh, not null. Is that right? Not null, true. Okay. We'll find out. Yes, it does.
String want to be all caps.
All right, and you can see I've added some validations on here. So not null, true. There's a min and a max of number. 2's a little low, so let's make that a little bigger. Our hair color has to be at least 3 characters, but not more than 25 characters. Same for outfit color.
String's supposed to be constant up there.
Under
gender. We've got string camel case. That's supposed to be uppercase.
Yes, it is. Thank you. I don't know, my autocomplete didn't work on that, did it? All right, so that looks good. So we've got our model, and the only other piece we need is a controller. So I'm using Express, so it's kind of a REST API type controller. So I'm going to move that in here. And this will let us do some, the way this is set up, you can do a router.get, and then it's going to run the Sequelize command to actually get the to basically query the database for you. So you can see here it's db.thing, so you're calling db.name of the model, .findAll in this case because this is the get for slash, and it's going to return all of the things out of the table or give us a failure. This one is going to take a parameter of the ID of the thing that we're trying to get. It's going to call find on that. It's got a where clause here. That where clause is going to take the ID, and it's going to return the thing to us. So this should work now, I think. I hope. Oh, that's the wrong command. Okay. So my Express is configured too so that everything's under API here. So if I say API/thing, it gives us nothing, right? There's nothing in the database table right now. So if we want to post something in there, we ought to be able to get that to work too. Let me look at the code here. So create, oh, here's post, okay. Post, with no parameters, it's going to take a request.body, it's going to call thing.create, and it's going to return that entity and a status code of 201. So pretty simple, right? So all we have to do is pass in, do a post with a JSON object that represents a thing, and then it should create it in the database for us. So let me go to Postman here. Yep, here's one. So this is a post. I'm doing application JSON as the content header. I'm passing in number, hair color, and outfit color. Okay, so something I probably should have done earlier, now that I think about it, is on my thing model. Or did I do that when I created it? Oh, I didn't. All right, well, we'll skip it for now. But we could have put a default value on there, too. Well, we can do it now. Default. It's going to be, I don't know, what are things? Unknown. Okay, so now I've modified the migration file, right? So I got to kill my server. I got to go back, run undo, drop the table, and then run it again. And it's not going to let me get to it because it thinks Postman is Chrome. There we go. That is so crazy. Will the real Chrome please stand up? If I go here and then click on it, I can get to it. That's so strange. All right. So we're going to post number. It's 1. Hair color is blue. Outfit color is red. And we should get a default value of indeterminate for the gender. So I hit send, and we get an error. All right, what's the error? Fatal error. Well, that's not good. Can't even work with that. Alright, is something off here? ID number, hair color, outfit color, gender, created at, updated at. So you can see what it tried to run here, select star from things. Or that's what we ran before when we hit the get. Right. I must have something configured wrong here. In the instance of time, I'm going to undo the change that I made there. Take out this. Rerun the migration. Wasn't up yet. There we go. So it created now the object in the table, and if we go and look, we should be able to see it there, and we do. And it did fill in our timestamps automatically for us. And if we hit the get now on the real Chrome, okay. I'm not doing anything stupid, am I there? It just won't let me into Chrome.
It's just on your other desktop. So yeah.
There we go. Okay, it's moving it over. So if we say API/thing, we should see that we get it there now. And thing/1 should give us the same one. We can add another thing. Let's change the number to 2. hit send, resetting. Thing 2. So that's pretty simple, right? Where it starts to get a little more complicated is when you start to actually build the relationships into the models. So let me show you that. So things come in a box. So let's create a box. I've got a table here, a migration called create box. It's going to have, the box is going to have a name, it's going to have a status, and created and updated, added an ID. So we're going to move that into migrations here. Oops. Kill our server and run our migrate. And we can see that it created box. And if we go look at our database, we should see that we do have a box table now. Oh, look at that. So it made a table called boxes because I named it boxes. So it's sort of clever how it does plurals. When I initially did this, I'm like, it's going to screw up with the ES thing. But in fact, it doesn't. You'll kind of see how that works. So I named it here boxes. So we've got our table in our database now, so we need a model. So here's our model class. Drop that into models. And let's look at box here. Okay, so here's an example of just, the default thing here. We're defining a name and we're defining a status. The status does have a default value of empty on it. But also we have this new thing here, an association. So basically, there's a parent-child relationship, right? So the parent has many children. The children belong to the parent. And you have to define it both ways so that they know. But if you actually look at the database, the way that it relates the two things together is that the ID of the parent will be stored on the child. But there's not really anything on the parent in the database that tells it anything about the child at all. But the child will have a field on it, which will be called, in this case, it would be called box ID, because the name of the model that it belongs to is box. So, and there's a way to customize this if you want to configure it different in there, but it's going to be capital BOX, capital ID. So that's kind of just the generic key that it's going to use when you're on a thing to know that that thing is connected to a box. So we have to add this associate here for that. While I'm in here, let me just point out that this is another way to add validations. You can actually set up validate methods that will run at creation time or update time, and do complicated things like look at values that you've assigned and things like that. So you're not just limited to the sort of out-of-the-box validate stuff that it gives you just as part of configuration. You can actually write your own custom validation and stick it in there if you want to. I'm not going to use that because I want my boxes to have lots of things. Alright, so we've got our model. We need a controller for this. And in point of fact, once we have the box controller, we really don't even need the thing controller anymore. And I'll explain that in just a little bit. But let's just look at creating a box right now. So we've got our box. So the difference is that the box is going to have things. Now when we query the REST API, we don't want to just get the box and then get an ID for the box and then go query the thing route and say, /thing/ all of my IDs or whatever. And because then we're making 2 hits to the database, right? We're making 2 hits across the network to the REST API, and we're also making 2 or more hits to the database, depending on how you do it. So what you can do here is you can, on your find commands for your models, you can include things like the ID, but you can also include children of the parent. So in this case, we're going to include the model db.thing as things. Now what this as things means is that on the Java or the JavaScript object that we're going to get, the JSON object, there's going to be the box, and it's going to have its fields there, and then it's going to have a collection there called things. It will be a lowercase t, even though it's uppercase here. And that'll be an array, and that array will contain all of the things that are associated to that box. So it's an easy way to like do a query, and these can get very complicated. In our application right now, most of our REST APIs like this are sometimes linking to 12, 13 tables, and they can be nested as well. So you can like, you know, have a user, the user has items, the items have options, the options have responses. You can keep just going all down the chain. And Sequelize is just going to build that SQL for you and run it when you hit it and call the find command. All right, so let's try and make a box here. Let me take this out for now. And let's just do a simple post here. Alrighty.
Should I run the migration?
Did I not do that? Good catch, thank you. Oh,
Yes.
it said I did. Yeah, I think I ran it. It's in the table, right? Yeah, we got it. Okay, box. All right, let's just give it a name. Boxy. All right, so now we got our box. Our box is named Boxy. So Boxy is going to want to have things in it. So now if we look, oh, I did forget to do one thing. No, I forgot to run a migration, but it wasn't that one. So we do have to specify somehow on thing, on the thing model, that it belongs to box, right? So we have to add an association, and we have to add the belongs to association. So a thing belongs to models.box. Because we've now done this, we have to put a field on the thing that is the ID of the parent, in this case box. So we've got to go add a field to our table called box ID. So to do that, I'm just going to create a new migration called modify_thing, and its up function is going to do migration.addColumn, and the table it's going to add to is things, and it's going to add this field box ID, and that field is an integer. And you can see that on the down, what it's going to do is remove that column. Exactly the same. So you could just go back and forth, up and down. Oops. Alrighty, so let's go run that migration now. And it said there's no pending migrations. Why did you say that? I just gave you a new one. Oh, I didn't move it in there. Now it's in there. There we go. So now if we go look at our schema for thing, we see that we have a new column, box ID. Alrighty, so
Did it also add the foreign key constraint, or do you have to do that yourself?
it takes care of it for you. When it starts up the engine. Let's see here. right, so now we've got, well, okay, so we've got one row out there already, right? We can just do it from here. If I change this to a put, and I tell it I want to update thing number 1, and I want to set box ID to 1, I think it's 1. Let's check just to be sure. Yeah, it's 1. Alright, so this should update that row, and it does. And you can see it's got box ID 1. So now if we go and we hit our box API, we should see, this is a little easier to see in the preview, but we've got a box now. It's got an array on it called things, and those things, well, there's just one thing inside of this box right now. Okay, so typically you don't want to be doing puts or creation of objects where you're going to have to like update 2 tables in different commits. You'd like to have them all in the same transaction, right? So there is a way to do that. How am I doing on time here? Getting close. All right. There is a way to do that. The way to do it is there's kind of a way that we're using, and there's sort of the traditional way. Let me show you the traditional way, if I can find the code. Oh, there it is. Okay. When you do your post, you can use something that Sequelize has called query chainer, and it's in utils query chainer. And you can basically create a chainer and have that chain basically run different things sort of in the order that you want specified. So this is sort of typically how you would like create something, and then in the exact same transaction add a bunch of other things to it at the same time. So what we're doing here is we're making a create chainer, creating associate chainer, we're making an array of things. We call db.box.build from the request body to actually build the box. We then add box.save to the create chainer, and then we go through the request body looking for all the things that are in the request body. We push those into the array, building them, so basically creating new models. We add those to the create chainer, and then it runs it all. So it runs the create chainer first, and if that's successful, so the create chainer is creating the box, and then if that's successful, it's going to run the associate chainer, and all of these things that have already been created up here by this build are going to then be associated to the box. So a little ugly, right? I mean, it's not the prettiest thing in the world. And if you get complicated object models that are very deeply nested that you're trying to pass in, you get a lot of really ugly code for this sort of stuff. One of the guys I work with, Alan Latacina, who's a Canadian, but we try not to hold it against him, came up with this really cool thing to help us sort of do this called DB Helpers. And what DB Helpers does is it uses one of the hooks that Sequelize gives you into the model in order to help sort of automate this process. So what he did was he decided that he would use, here, let's look at box, these instance methods that are on the models in order to handle doing these associations as models are created. So we define an instance method on the box, which is to update the associations, and it just calls dbhelpers.updateAssociations. We need db helpers, obviously. And on the thing, you have a class method as well called update or create. So basically, what this method on db helpers is going to do is run through all of the children, and if they don't exist, it's going to create them, and if they do exist, it's going to update them with whatever's in the payload. And then the class method that's on the parent will then associate those children to the parent. So you wind up with fairly concise code that will actually take a payload that includes a very complex nested JSON object and stick it on the database for you, or update it in the database for you. Let's give you an example. So rather than doing this sort of just basic create here, it comes out looking more like this. We create a query chainer. We create our box, we add the box to the create chainer, we run the create chainer, so that's just like before, right? That's basically creating the parent object for us. And then after it's run, we just call update associations on it, passing it in the name of the objects that we want it to update, and this could be a long set of things. And then it's going to run through everything, basically create them, using the class method that's on the thing model, and then it will associate those things to the parent. So it makes it really easy to then pass in an object that looks something like, let's see here. No, that's not it. My server's protesting, isn't it? I thought I saved one. Well, I must not have saved one. Well, rats. Well, I won't show you. But basically it would have this and then have, that is a comma, right? Things, colon, array, and then you've got your various things inside of there. So you can pass in a payload like that, and it'll just go and create it. So I'm sort of running out of time, so the last thing I want to talk about is the seed command. So very common pattern that something that you'll find helpful is as you bring your database up, you run these migrations, sometimes you want to get rid of bad data, right? You want to start over, you want to start from a fresh standpoint, especially if you have a suite of tests, functional tests, that you're running that are hitting the database, and that suite of functional tests needs a particular set of data to run, right? So there's a way that you can actually put that into the database before you, or whenever you want, really. In this case, this is an example of a seed file. The way this is invoked is just with coffee for me. Something like that. I don't know if it's going to work now. I've got something wrong with I got a typo somewhere. But the seed file is going to use that query chainer that I was talking about before to basically go through and put some sample data into your database for you. So again, it's creating a chain here. The first thing it's going to do is go through these tables here, and it's going to destroy everything in those tables. So it's going to basically empty out the database that's there. Then it's going to take these objects here, boxes, and you can see this is an example of what I was talking about with the things basically defined as being inside of the box already. So we've got two box objects here. They each contain two different things. And then we run through for each box, build the box, add it to the chain, and then on success, we're going to call update associations on each of those models, and it should associate all of the things to the boxes. So by doing this, we have a very complicated script that we actually run as part of our seed and as part of our automated development deploy process that empties out the database, runs all the migrations to get the database up to the latest schema changes, and then it populates the data into the database that all the functional tests run, and then runs all the functional tests. So it's a nice way to sort of get your data automated. I wouldn't say that it's been the easiest thing to work with. A lot of the information, especially on the associations and the query trainers and stuff, was kind of difficult to come by. I think Alan was pulling his hair out a lot. I know I pulled my hair out a lot on the seed stuff. But we got it to a point where everything's working and it seems to be meeting all of our needs. It performs pretty well. And given that there really isn't a good, I mean, I would love to hear if you guys know of other ways to do this too, but I haven't really found a good way to do JSON objects into a relational database. This seems to be the best thing I've run across so far. So that's it. Questions? Yes, sir.
Would you start with this if you were not using a SQL database?
No, this is just for a SQL database. Like
it's just for Postgres, correct?
No, Postgres, MySQL, MariaDB.
I screwed up my question. Would you use this if you're using like a SQL database? Would you use this as opposed to just one of the node modules that is specifically for that database? Like there's a couple for MySQL or Postgres. Would you use this over one of them?
I don't know. I'd have to look and see. That Node ORM project that's out there was kind of new when we started looking at this, so that might be better at this point. But I think I would use something like this. I mean, I come from a Java background, so I used Hibernate, and that kind of makes sense to me. I don't like writing my own SQL queries, and this writes them for you, so I see that as a good thing.
Thanks.
So it seems like the associations are greedy, essentially. And if I understand, Hibernate and a lot of other ORMs are not. They'll return lists of IDs, but not arrays of the actual objects. If you run into any, I mean, and there's a very good reason for that, right? So have you run into any trouble with that?
Not yet. We might eventually. I don't know. And these are, I mean, I'm sure that other people have, and once I hit that wall, I'll probably.
Is there a way to toggle that?
There probably is. I don't know. I haven't looked into it at all. That's a good point, though. I'll have to bring that up with Alan. Anything else?
When you say when you're using production data and you don't want to screw the database up, migrations are the best way to go. Is that just because it's a computer generating the SQL and it's like there's no human error? I mean, does it make it backflip the database when you migrate it, or like why do you say it's safer?
Human error. Okay, I have been in situations where you tell the Oracle DBA that you need certain things done, and they do screw it up, right? But they typically have backups and can get it back again. So while human error is a possibility, I think it's just so normally right now, if you're working in this kind of a database with a large team, anytime you make any sort of structural changes to the database that cause code to break, you got to tell everybody, right? You got to tell them, I changed the name of this field, or I deleted this field from this table, or whatever. And Hibernate especially, it'll completely blow up if you do stuff like that. So the migrations, and I think this idea of the migrations comes from Ruby, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not a Rubyist, so I don't know for certain, but it's just a way that you can easily share with the other developers, mostly in the development process, the changes that are going on to the database, and quickly sort of get them into your workspace and get up to date. When you are in production, though, it is going to be important to not do things that will destroy data and whatever. I mean, you're still going to have to do all of that stuff that you normally do in production to protect your data. But, you know, what we used to do was basically write up a big text file with all the SQL in it, right, that we want the DBA to run. And then an American Family, anyway, they would have to put that into some mainframe job with some COBOL around it in order to actually run it in DB2 and get all those changes applied to the database. And this, you don't have to do that. I mean, you're just running it from code. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah.
Anything else? All right, do we have time for a break? Or,
Yeah, let's do
or do
it.
we need to go on? Yeah. Break? Thank
All
you.
right.
Sure. For 5 minutes, and then we'll start the next presentation. Thank you.